The winter of 1883 had settled over Dry Hollow like a shroud, turning the already harsh Wyoming territory into something even more unforgiving. The town sat in a valley between two ridges, its wooden buildings huddled together as if seeking warmth from each other. Snow didn't fall here often, but when it did, it came mixed with dust and grit, creating a gray slush that matched the souls of most who called this place home. Clara Whitmore stood at the frost-covered window of what had once been her husband's study, watching the sun die behind the western ridge. 3 months had passed since they'd hanged Josiah from the oak tree outside the church, the very church where he'd preached forgiveness and compassion to hearts too hardened to hear. The townspeople had called him a heretic, a blasphemer who dared suggest that God's love extended even to the Shoshone Indians camped beyond the ridge. But Clara knew the truth. Her husband's only sin had been refusing to bless the land grab that would have made a few men rich and many families homeless. Still mooning over that fool preacher? Martha Whitmore's voice cut through the silence like a rusty blade. Clara didn't turn. She'd learned that acknowledging her mother-in-law only invited more venom. "Supper needs tending," Martha continued, her boots heavy on the warped floorboards. "Unless you plan to be useless as well as barren." The word struck its intended target, as it always did. 4 years of marriage, 4 years of prayers and hopes, and Clara's womb had remained empty. In a place like Dry Hollow, a woman who couldn't bear children was worth less than a broken-down mule. Clara made her way to the kitchen, where the smell of boiled beans and fatback filled the air. Thomas Whitmore sat at the table, his face already flushed from whiskey, though the sun hadn't been down an hour. Josiah's brother looked nothing like him, where Josiah had been tall and gentle-eyed. Thomas was thick-set with the mean look of a man who found pleasure in others' misfortune. "About time," he grunted as Clara set the pot on the table. "A man works all day. Least he can expect is a hot meal waiting." She bit back the response that Thomas's idea of work consisted mainly of drinking and gambling at Murphy's Saloon, since Josiah's death. Whatever small income the family had came from her taking in washing and mending. Her hands, once soft from a life back east before she'd followed Josiah to this godforsaken place, were now red and cracked from lye soap and cold water. The meal passed in sullen silence until the sound of horses outside announced visitors. Thomas's face lit up with the particular gleam that meant he expected either money or entertainment, possibly both. "That'll be the boys," he said, pushing back from the table. "Get the good whiskey out, woman." Clara's stomach tightened. Thomas's boys were the worst Dry Hollow had to offer. Men who'd prospered not through honest work, but through intimidation and connections with the territory's shadowy power brokers. The same men who'd orchestrated Josiah's death, though no one would ever prove it. They crowded into the small house, bringing with them the stench of unwashed bodies and cheap tobacco. Clara recognized Jake Morrison, the saloon owner whose establishment served as the unofficial courthouse where men's fates were decided over cards and whiskey. Beside him stood Pete Garrett, who ran the livery stable and was known for his heavy fists and heavier drinking. 2 others she knew by sight but not by name, drifters who'd attached themselves to whoever held power in town. "Evening, Widow Whitmore," Morrison said, tipping his hat with mocking courtesy. His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Still wearing mourning clothes? I see. Your husband's been in the ground 3 months. Time to move on, don't you think?" Clara said nothing, burying herself with pouring whiskey into grimy glasses. The men settled around the table, cards appearing as if by magic. "Speaking of moving on," Thomas said, dealing the first hand, "I've been thinking about California. Man could make a fresh start out there, especially with a little stake money." The conversation turned to poker, punctuated by crude jokes and cruder language. Clara retreated to the corner near the stove, making herself as invisible as possible. She'd learned this skill in the months since Josiah's death, becoming a shadow, a piece of furniture that the men barely noticed unless they needed something. The whiskey flowed freely, and with it, the men's voices grew louder, their laughter harsher. Clara watched the pile of coins and bills in the center of the table grow and shrink as fortune favored first one player, then another. Thomas was losing badly, his face growing redder with each hand. "I'm tapped out," he finally announced, throwing his cards down in disgust. "Now that's a shame," Morrison said, counting his winnings. "And here I was hoping for one more hand. Course, if you got something else to stake." Thomas's eyes darted around the room as if seeking inspiration. They landed on Clara, and something shifted in his expression. "What kind of something else?" he asked slowly. Morrison leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "Well now, a man gets lonely running a saloon. Could use someone to help with the cleaning and such. Your sister-in-law there looks like she's got capable hands." The room went very still. Clara felt the blood drain from her face as the meaning behind Morrison's words became clear. "She ain't much to look at," Thomas said, his voice carrying a speculative note that made Clara's stomach turn. "And barren besides. But she can cook and clean well enough." "I'm not talking about permanent," Morrison clarified. "Just borrowing her for a spell. Say, in exchange for that case of good Kentucky bourbon I got in last week." Martha's harsh laugh broke the tension. "Lord knows she's not doing us any good here, eating our food, taking up space. Least she could earn her keep for once." Clara found her voice at last. "I'm not property to be bartered." The words came out steadier than she felt. Thomas stood so fast his chair toppled backward. "You'll do as you're told. Woman, you've been living off our charity long enough." "Charity?" Clara's controls snapped. "I've been paying for this roof with my own labor while you drink away." The slap came hard and fast, knocking her back against the wall. Stars danced in her vision as Thomas loomed over her. "You got no say in this, no rights neither. The preacher's dead, and you're nothing but a burden we've been too kind to cast out." Morrison stood, straightening his vest. "Tell you what, Thomas, make it interesting. One hand of cards, none, I win. I get the widow and you get 2 cases of bourbon. You win, you get the bourbon and keep the woman. And if I want in on this game," Pete Garrett spoke up, his piggy eyes fixed on Clara with an expression that made her wish for death. What followed was perhaps the most degrading hour of Clara's life. The men haggled over her like she was livestock at auction, each adding their stakes to the pot. By the end, she was worth 3 cases of whiskey, 2 bottles of rye, and a $20 gold piece. They made her stand in the middle of the room while they played their final hand, examining her like a horse they were considering buying. Comments about her figure, her age, her failure to produce children flew across the table like the cards they slapped down with increasing violence. Clara stood straight, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She thought of Josiah, of his gentle hands and kind words, of the way he'd seen her as a partner, not property. She'd survived his death. She would survive this too. Somehow, Morrison won. To no one's surprise, he was known for his skill with cards, and Clara suspected the deck had been marked from the beginning. "Well then," he said, standing and stretching, "guess I'll be taking my winnings." That's when the door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air that made the oil lamps flicker. Every head turned toward the figure silhouetted in the doorway. Eli Carver stepped inside, snowflakes still clinging to his long duster coat. He was tall and lean, with the kind of stillness that made wise men nervous. Most folks in Dry Hollow gave him a wide berth. The man lived alone up in the mountains, coming to town only when he needed supplies. Rumors followed him like shadows, that he'd killed a man in Arizona, maybe more than one, that he'd been a soldier, or an outlaw, or both. His eyes, gray as winter sky, took in the scene with one sweep. The overturned chair, Clara standing alone in the center of the room, the men's guilty, excited faces. "Evening," he said, his voice soft but carrying clearly. "Seems I'm interrupting something." "Nothing that concerns you, Carver," Morrison said, but some of his bluster had faded. "Just a private game among friends." Eli moved into the room with the easy grace of a man comfortable with violence. He stopped at the table, looking down at the cards scattered across its surface. "Heard talk at Murphy's," he said conversationally. "Something about a widow being offered up as stakes. Didn't believe it at first. Thought surely the men of Dry Hollow hadn't sunk that low." "Now see here," Thomas started, but Eli's look cut him off. "What's the price?" Eli asked. Morrison smiled. "Misunderstanding. Well now, if you're looking to get in on the action, I'm asking what you think she's worth." Eli's voice remained soft, almost gentle, but something in it made the room feel colder. 3 cases of whiskey, 2 bottles of rye, and $20 gold," Garrett supplied eagerly. Eli reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. He counted out $40 in gold coins, letting each one ring against the table. Then he added 2 more 20s. "Double it," he said. "The lady comes with me." "Now wait just a minute," Thomas protested. "We already got a deal." "No," Eli said, and the word fell like a hammer. "You've got nothing but a room full of cowards pretending to be men. Take the money. Be grateful I'm offering anything at all." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Morrison's hand twitched toward the gun at his hip, but Eli simply waited, patient as stone. Everyone knew the stories. Everyone knew that Eli Carver had survived things that would have killed ordinary men. Finally. Morrison laughed, though it sounded forced. "Hell, money's money. She's all yours. Carver." Eli turned to Clara for the first time. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "if you'll get your things, we'll be going." Clara found she could barely speak. I don't—" "Take your time," he said. "I'll wait outside." She gathered her few possessions in a daze: 2 dresses, her Bible, the silver brush that had been her mother's. Everything fit into a small carpet bag. When she emerged from the bedroom she'd shared with Josiah, the men avoided her eyes. Eli was waiting by his horse, a sturdy mountain breed built for harsh terrain. He'd brought a second horse, saddled and ready. "Can you ride?" he asked. Clara nodded. Before Josiah, before Dry Hollow. She'd grown up on a farm in Missouri. He helped her mount, his hands impersonal but gentle. As they prepared to leave, Martha appeared in the doorway. "Good riddance," she called out. "Never were nothing but a burden anyway." Clara didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the trail ahead as they rode out of Dry Hollow, leaving behind the only life she'd known for the past 4 years. Snow began to fall more heavily, covering their tracks, erasing their passage as if they'd never been there at all. Beside her, Eli Carver rode in silence, a stranger who'd paid double the price of whiskey for her freedom. She didn't know what he wanted, what he expected, but as the lights of Dry Hollow faded behind them and the mountain darkness closed in, Clara found she wasn't afraid. Whatever lay ahead couldn't be worse than what she'd left behind. The wind howled through the valley, carrying away the last echoes of laughter from the house where men had tried to sell her soul. But souls, Clara reflected, weren't so easily bought and sold. And perhaps, in this harsh and unforgiving land, there were still those who understood the difference between price and worth. The mountain trail wound upward through stands of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, their branches heavy with fresh snow. Clara pulled the borrowed coat tighter around her shoulders, grateful for its warmth, even as she wondered at the thoughtfulness of a man who'd bring an extra coat for a woman he hadn't known he'd be traveling with. They'd been riding for near 2 hours in silence. The only sounds, the crunch of hooves on snow and the occasional snort from the horses. The storm had picked up, turning the world into a swirling mass of white that made Clara grateful for Eli's sure guidance. He rode ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure she was still following, but offering no conversation. As they climbed higher, the cold bit deeper. Clara's hands, already numb despite her gloves, could barely grip the reins. She'd never admit it, but fear was settling into her bones alongside the chill. Where was this stranger taking her? What did he expect in return for his gold? Finally, just when she thought she could ride no further, a structure materialized through the snow, a cabin built of thick logs, with a stone chimney from which smoke promised warmth. A barn stood nearby, sturdy and well-maintained. Eli dismounted first, leading his horse to the barn, when he returned for hers. Clara found her legs too stiff to move. "Allow me," he said quietly, reaching up to help her down. His hands were steady at her waist, lowering her gently until her feet found the ground. He released her immediately, stepping back as if conscious of propriety even here in the wilderness. "Let's get you inside where it's warm," he said. "I'll see to the horses after." The cabin's interior surprised her. She'd expected the sparse quarters of a hermit, but this was a home. Handmade furniture showed skill and care in its construction. Books lined one wall. Real books, not just the Bible and almanac most frontier homes boasted. The main room held a large stone fireplace, a dining table, and a kitchen area with a proper stove. Eli knelt by the fireplace, coaxing the banked coals back to life. "There's a bedroom through that door," he said without looking at her. "You'll find it comfortable enough. I'll take the loft." Clara stood frozen, not from cold, but from confusion. "Mr. Carver—" "Eli," he corrected, adding wood to the growing flames. "Eli," she repeated, the informality feeling strange on her tongue. "I need to understand. Why did you—" She stopped, unsure how to phrase the question. He rose, dusting his hands on his pants, for the first time since leaving Dry Hollow. He looked directly at her. His gray eyes held something she couldn't name, not pity, exactly, but a kind of recognition. "Are you hungry?" he asked, ignoring her half-formed question. "I've got stew I can warm, and bread from yesterday." Clara realized she was famished. The tension of the evening had driven all thought of food from her mind, but now her stomach cramped with emptiness. While he busied himself in the kitchen area, she stood awkwardly by the fire, taking in more details of the cabin. Everything spoke of a man who lived deliberately. No wasted space, no frivolous decorations, but also no harshness. It was the dwelling of someone who understood the difference between necessity and comfort. "Sit," Eli said, setting a bowl of thick venison stew on the table. "You look ready to collapse." The food was simple but good, better than anything she'd eaten in months. Clara ate slowly, savoring the warmth spreading through her body. Eli sat across from her with his own bowl, eating with the same quiet efficiency he seemed to bring to everything. "I can work," Clara said suddenly. "I'm a fair cook, and I can clean, mend clothes, tend garden come spring. I won't be a burden." He paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. "I didn't bring you here to be my servant." "Then why?" The question burst out before she could stop it. Eli set down his spoon, considering. A man can't stand by and watch something like that happen, not if he wants to live with himself after. "You don't know me. I'm nothing to you." "You're wrong there," he said quietly. "You're someone. That's enough." Clara felt tears threaten and blinked them back furiously. She'd shed too many tears these past months. She wouldn't cry now in front of this strange, kind man. "I'll earn my keep," she insisted. "If it makes you feel better, you can help with the household chores. Lord knows I'm no great shakes at keeping house, but you're not obligated. You're free to leave whenever you choose, though I'd ask you to wait until spring. The mountain's no place for a woman alone in winter." Free to leave. The words rang in Clara's ears like church bells. When was the last time she'd been free to do anything? After supper, Eli showed her the bedroom. It was small but clean, with a proper bed instead of a straw tick, quilts that looked handmade, and even a small dresser with a mirror. "There's a bar for the door," he said, indicating the heavy wooden beam. "Use it. You're safe here, but I imagine trust comes hard after what you've been through." He bid her good night and climbed the ladder to the loft, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts. She did bar the door, then sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of the day's events. This morning she'd woken in her private hell, and now she didn't know what to think. The next days passed in a strange rhythm. Clara woke each morning half expecting to find it all a dream, that she was back in the Whitmore house with Martha's harsh voice and Thomas's heavy fists. Instead, she found Eli already up, coffee made, fire built high against the cold. He was unlike any man she'd known. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were considered kind. He never raised his voice, never made demands. He went about his daily tasks, tending the horses, checking his trap lines, repairing tools, with a quiet competence that she found oddly soothing. Clara threw herself into household work with a fervor that surprised them both. She scrubbed the cabin from top to bottom, organized the pantry, mended every piece of clothing she could find. It was as if by making herself useful, she could justify her presence, earn her place in this strange new life. "You don't have to work yourself to death," Eli told her one afternoon, finding her on her knees, scrubbing the already clean floor. "I need to," she said, not looking up. "I need to do something." He seemed to understand, leaving her to her furious cleaning. Gradually, the panic that had driven her first days began to ease. She learned Eli's routines, the rhythm of mountain life. He taught her how to bank the fire properly, how to read the signs of incoming weather, how to store food to keep it from freezing or spoiling. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, not talking much but sharing the comfortable silence. Sometimes Eli would whittle. He was carving what looked like a chess set, while Clara mended or read from one of his books. He had Shakespeare, which surprised her, and poetry by writers she'd never heard of. "You're educated," she observed one evening, looking up from leaves of grass. "My mother was a school teacher back in Ohio," he said. "She made sure her children could read and cipher, even after we came west." It was the first personal information he'd offered. Clara wanted to ask more about his family, his past, why he lived alone on this mountain, but something in his manner discouraged questions. 3 weeks into her stay, Clara found herself humming while she cooked breakfast. The sound surprised her. She hadn't hummed since before Josiah's death. She stopped abruptly, but Eli looked up from the harness he was mending. "Don't stop," he said. "It's nice, hearing music in the house again." Again. The word hung between them, hinting at a past he wasn't ready to share. That afternoon, while Eli was out checking his trap line, Clara explored the small barn. In the back corner, covered by a canvas tarp, she found a trunk. Curiosity overcame propriety, and she lifted the lid. Inside were a woman's things: dresses, a bonnet, a silver-backed hairbrush much like her own. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was a daguerreotype of a young woman with kind eyes and a shy smile. Her name was Mary. Clara spun, guilty at being caught snooping. Eli stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Your wife?" she asked softly. "My sister." He moved into the barn, standing beside her to look down at the photograph. She died 7 years ago. Clara waited, sensing there was more. "We had a small ranch down near Tucson. Mary kept house for me after our parents passed. She was everything good in the world. Kind, gentle, always seeing the best in people." His voice remained steady, but Clara heard the pain beneath the words. "Some men came through, looking for work, they said. I was fool enough to hire them. One day I came back from moving cattle to find—" He stopped, jaw tight. "They'd forced themselves on her. She fought them. Mary always was braver than she looked. They killed her for it." Clara's hand moved instinctively to touch his arm, then stopped. "I'm so sorry. I tracked them down." Eli continued, his voice flat now. "Did what needed doing, but it didn't bring her back, and it didn't make the guilt go away. I should have been there. Should have protected her. You couldn't have known. A man protects his family," he said firmly. "I failed in that. So I came here, away from people, where I couldn't fail anyone else." Now Clara understood. The cabin that felt like a home because it had been prepared for a woman who never came. The gentle way he treated her, like she might break. The pain that lived in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. "Is that why you helped me?" she asked. "Because of Mary?" He considered this. Maybe partly, but mostly because it was right. Because no woman should be treated like property, bought and sold like cattle. They stood quietly for a moment, both lost in thought. "I'll put these back," Clara said finally, gesturing to the trunk. "No, Eli said. Take what you need. Mary would have wanted them used, not moldering away in a trunk. That evening, Clara wore one of Mary's dresses to supper. It fit reasonably well, the blue calico bringing out the color in her eyes. Eli's smile when he saw her was worth any discomfort she felt wearing a dead woman's clothes. It suits you, was all he said, but warmth spread through her chest at the words. That night, Clara lay in bed thinking about the strange turns life could take. A month ago, she'd been trapped in a nightmare, sold like property to the highest bidder. Now she was here, in a warm cabin with a man who asked nothing of her but that she heal in her own time. She thought of Josiah, of his gentle faith and conviction. He would have liked Eli, she thought, would have recognized the goodness in him that others missed, too distracted by the dangerous exterior. For the first time since Josiah's death, Clara felt something besides grief and fear. It was tiny, fragile as spring's first flower, but it was there, hope that life might hold something more than mere survival, hope that the wounds carved into her heart might someday scar over, if not heal completely. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but the cabin stood strong against it. Like Eli himself, weathered, scarred, but unbroken. And perhaps, Clara thought as sleep finally took her, that was enough. Perhaps broken people could build something whole together, given time and patience and the space to trust again. In the loft above, Eli lay awake, listening to the settling sounds of someone else in his house. For 7 years, he'd lived with ghosts and guilt. Now there was a living woman under his roof, bringing warmth back to rooms too long cold. He didn't know what would come of it. Didn't know if Clara would stay come spring or if she'd take her newfound freedom and leave him to his solitude. But for now, it was enough to know she was safe, that he'd done one right thing in a world full of wrongs. The storm outside began to quiet, and both souls in the cabin finally found rest, each haunted by their past but no longer quite so alone in facing it. The morning Clara found the broken cross changed everything. She'd been cleaning the small storage room off the kitchen, a space Eli seemed to use for things he didn't quite know what to do with, behind a stack of old newspapers and mining equipment. Something caught her eye, a piece of carved wood, split down the middle. She knew that cross. Her hands trembled as she picked up the pieces. Josiah had carved it himself their first winter in Dry Hollow, working by lamplight after long days of ministering to souls that didn't want saving. The wood was pine, soft and easy to work, with a small dove etched at the intersection of the beams. "Oh, Josiah," she whispered, clutching the pieces to her chest. That's how Eli found her an hour later, crumpled on the floor, sobbing as she hadn't sobbed since the day they put her husband in the ground. She didn't hear him come in, didn't notice his presence until she felt something soft pressed into her hand. A clean handkerchief. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He simply sat on the floor beside her, his back against the wall, and waited. The storm of grief had to run its course, and he seemed to understand that. When the tears finally slowed, Clara found her voice. "This was Josiah's, my husband's. I don't know how it came to be here." "There was an auction," Eli said quietly. "After the hanging, the town council sold off the preacher's belongings to recover costs. They said, I bought what I could, thinking someday someone might want them back. I should have told you sooner." Clara looked at him through swollen eyes. "You knew Josiah?" "I heard him preach once. Came down from the mountain for supplies, and curiosity got the better of me. He was talking about the Good Samaritan, how God's love doesn't see the boundaries men create." Eli's mouth twisted in something like a smile. "Half the congregation walked out, but I stayed till the end. Your husband had courage. Ma'am, speaking truth to people who didn't want to hear it." "They killed him for it," Clara said bitterly. "For saying the Shoshone were children of God too, for refusing to bless stolen land." "I know." She looked at him sharply. "You know, I make it my business to know what happens in the valley. Your husband was murdered, plain and simple, dressed up as religious justice, but murder all the same. For the first time in months, Clara felt understood. Everyone in Dry Hollow had either believed the charges against Josiah or been too frightened to say otherwise. But here was this taciturn mountain man stating the truth as plainly as sunrise. "Tell me about him," Eli said, "if you want to." So Clara did. She told him about meeting Josiah at a church social in Independence, how his earnestness had charmed her. She spoke of their dreams of bringing God's word to the frontier, of building a community based on love rather than fear. She described Josiah's gentle ways, his patience with everyone from drunk cowboys to suspicious Indians, his absolute faith that goodness would prevail if given the chance. "He was naive," she admitted. "He believed the best of everyone, even when they showed him their worst. I used to worry about it, told him he needed to be more careful. He'd just smile and quote scripture at me. Perfect love casteth out fear." "He was right to believe," Eli said, "even if it cost him. World needs men like that, even if it doesn't deserve them." Clara studied him. "You're not naive, but you helped me. Why?" Eli was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe because I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. Maybe because your husband's sermon stayed with me, about seeing the divine in every soul. I'm no religious man, Mrs. Whitmore, but I know right from wrong." "Clara," she corrected softly. "Please call me Clara." That afternoon, Eli showed her the other items he'd saved from the auction: Josiah's Bible with his notes in the margins, a few books, his preaching clothes. Clara handled each item with reverence, memories flooding back with every touch. "Would you help me with something?" she asked suddenly. Together, they repaired the broken cross, Eli's skilled hands guiding hers as they fitted the pieces back together with glue and small nails, when it was whole again. Clara hung it on the wall of her room, where the morning light would catch it. The days that followed were different, having spoken Josiah's name, having grieved openly. Something loosened in Clara's chest. She found herself talking more at meals, sharing stories of her life before Dry Hollow, her childhood on the Missouri farm, her dreams of being a teacher before she met Josiah. Eli, in turn, began to open up in small ways. He taught her practical skills, but also why he did things certain ways. He showed her how to read weather signs in the clouds and wind, how to tell the difference between animal tracks in the snow. "That's elk," he said one morning, pointing to large hoof prints near the woodshed. "And here, see the smaller ones? That's her calf, late for a young one to still be with its mother. But sometimes they stay together through the first winter." Clara found herself looking forward to these lessons, to the quiet patience with which he explained things. He never made her feel foolish for not knowing, never acted superior. It was simply knowledge shared, one person to another. One afternoon, while Eli was out hunting, Clara decided to explore beyond the immediate vicinity of the cabin. The sun was bright, the snow crisp underfoot. She didn't intend to go far, just wanted to see more of this mountain that had become her refuge. She found a small clearing where the snow lay undisturbed, ringed by tall pines. The silence was profound. Not the oppressive silence of the Whitmore house, but something clean and pure. Clara stood in the center of the clearing and, for the first time in months, felt like she could breathe fully. The impulse came suddenly. She opened her mouth and sang a hymn Josiah had loved. Amazing Grace. Her voice, unused to singing for so long, cracked on the high notes, but she didn't care. The trees were her only audience. She didn't hear Eli approach, didn't know he was there until the last note faded and he spoke. "You have a beautiful voice." Clara whirled, embarrassed. "I didn't know you were... I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. I was tracking a deer and heard..." He gestured helplessly. "It's been a long time since I heard anyone sing like that." "I used to lead the church choir," Clara said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Haven't sung since... well, since... You should sing more. The mountain could use the music." That evening, as they ate the venison stew Eli had made from his successful hunt, he surprised her with a question. "Do you miss it? The church? The community?" Clara considered. "I miss what I thought we were building. I miss the feeling of purpose, of being part of something larger than myself, but the community. She shook her head. They showed me who they really were when they let Josiah hang. How can I miss people who could do that? People are complicated, Eli said, capable of great good and great evil, sometimes in the same day. Your husband saw the good and trusted it to win out. Maybe that's not naive. Maybe that's faith. Do you have faith? Clara asked. Not in God, if that's what you mean. But I believe in choices. In the small decisions that shape a life. Every day we choose who we're going to be. Your husband chose to stand for what was right. You choose to keep going despite everything. Those choices matter. Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. But these were different. Cleaner somehow. What do you choose, Eli? He looked at her across the table, his gray eyes serious. Today I chose to hunt so we could eat, to fix the fence so the horses stay safe, to sit here with you instead of taking my meal alone like I have for 7 years. Small choices, maybe, but they add up to a life. Later, as Clara prepared for bed, she found herself humming again. It wasn't conscious, just something that bubbled up from inside. When she realized what she was doing, she didn't stop. Through the thin walls, she heard Eli moving about in the main room, banking the fire for the night. The domestic sounds were comforting, footsteps she recognized, the particular way he latched the door, the creak of the ladder as he climbed to the loft. She thought about what he'd said about choices. Every day since Josiah's death, she'd chosen to survive but not to live. Now, in this cabin on a mountain with a man who understood grief, she was beginning to choose differently. The next morning, she made breakfast humming. When Eli came in from feeding the horses, stamping snow from his boots, he smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. Flapjacks? He asked, sniffing appreciatively. With the last of the maple syrup, Clara confirmed. I thought we deserved something special. What's the occasion? Clara flipped a flapjack, considering. Tuesday, she said finally. Tuesday seems reason enough. Eli laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was rusty but genuine. Can't argue with that logic. As they ate, Clara found herself studying him, without the constant shield of wariness he usually wore. Eli looked younger, less burdened. She wondered if she looked different too, if grief was loosening its hold on her features the way it was loosening its hold on her heart. I've been thinking, Eli said, pushing back his empty plate. Spring will come eventually. When it does, you'll need to decide what you want, where you want to be. Clara's stomach tightened. She'd been trying not to think about spring, about leaving this safe haven. I know. I want you to know you're welcome to stay, not as anything you're not comfortable with, but as a friend. Maybe someone to share the work and the quiet, only if you want. The offer hung between them, delicate as frost on a window pane. Clara could see what it cost him to make it, this man who'd chosen solitude as his shield against more loss. I don't know what I want yet, she said honestly. Is that all right? More than all right. You've got time to figure it out. All the time you need. That afternoon, while Eli repaired snowshoes, Clara sat by the fire with Josiah's Bible. She hadn't been able to open it before, but now she traced his familiar handwriting in the margins, his notes and thoughts on Scripture. On the page for 1 Corinthians, he'd written, "Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." She thought about love, the quiet love she'd shared with Josiah, built on shared faith and purpose. It had been good and true, but it hadn't been able to protect either of them from the world's cruelty. Then she looked at Eli, bent over his work, hands steady and sure. There was love here too, though neither of them had named it, the love of small kindnesses, of space given and comfort offered, the love of two wounded souls careful not to cause more hurt. Clara didn't know what shape that love might take, given time, but for now, it was enough that it existed, fragile and unnamed, warming the cabin as surely as the fire in the hearth. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, and Clara found herself humming along, adding her voice to the mountain's song. The blizzard struck without warning on a clear February morning. Eli had gone out before dawn to check his trap lines, promising to be back by midday. Clara watched from the window as the sky turned from blue to gray to an ominous yellow-white that made her stomach clench with worry. By noon, the wind was howling like a living thing, driving snow horizontal across the clearing. She could barely see the barn, though it stood only 20 yards from the cabin of Eli. There was no sign. Clara tried to stay calm. Eli knew these mountains better than anyone. He'd weathered countless storms, knew how to find shelter, how to survive. But as afternoon wore into evening and the storm intensified, her worry deepened into fear. She kept the fire high and hung a lantern in the window, a beacon he told her to use if ever he was late returning. The hours crawled by, marked only by the clock's steady ticking and the storm's increasing fury. Near midnight, she heard it, a thump against the door, barely audible over the wind. Clara flew to open it, and Eli half fell into the cabin, covered in ice and snow, his face gray with cold. "Eli!" She caught him as he stumbled, his weight nearly taking them both down. His clothes were frozen stiff, ice crystals in his beard and eyebrows, but worse was the dark stain spreading across his left side. "Got careless," he mumbled through frozen lips. "Mountain cat. Thought I was after her territory." Clara's mind went sharp and clear, the way it had when she'd helped neighbor women through difficult births back in Missouri. She half dragged, half carried Eli to the fire, her strength born of desperation. "We need to get these clothes off," she said, already working at the frozen buttons of his coat. "You're going to freeze to death." Eli tried to help, but his hands were too numb, his coordination gone. Clara worked quickly, efficiently, pushing aside any thought of impropriety. This was about saving his life. Nothing more. The claw marks ran from his ribs to his hip, 3 parallel gashes, deep enough to need stitching. They'd stopped bleeding, the cold acting as a brutal bandage. But she knew they'd open again once he warmed up. She covered him with every blanket in the cabin, then set about heating water and finding the medical supplies. Eli drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering things that made no sense. Something about Mary, about failing again. "You didn't fail," Clara told him firmly, cleaning the wounds with whiskey from his stores. "You made it home. You survived." He groaned when she started stitching, using skills learned from her mother and refined by necessity on the frontier. Her hands were steady despite the circumstances, each stitch neat and precise. "Clara," he said, suddenly lucid. "If I don't—" "You will," she interrupted. "You will make it because I won't let you die. Do you understand me? Eli Carver, I won't let you die." Through the night, she fought for him. When fever came, she bathed his face with cool cloths. When chills shook his body, she piled on more blankets and fed the fire until the cabin was stifling. When he called out in delirium, for Mary, for forgiveness, for death she didn't understand, she held his hand and talked him through it. "I'm here," she said over and over. "You're safe. I'm here." Dawn came gray and subdued, the storm finally dying. Eli's fever broke near noon, his eyes opening clear and focused for the first time since he'd stumbled through the door. "Clara?" His voice was rough, confused. "What?" "Mountain cat," she reminded him gently. "You've been fevered all night. How do you feel?" He tried to sit up, winced, and thought better of it. "Like I wrestled a grizzly and lost. Did you—" He looked down at the neat bandages wrapped around his torso. "You took care of me." "Of course I did." She turned away to hide the tears of relief threatening to fall. "I'll make you some broth. You need to eat." For the next days, their roles reversed. Clara became the caretaker, Eli the reluctant patient. He was a terrible invalid, trying to get up too soon, insisting he was fine when clearly he wasn't. But Clara had dealt with stubborn men before. "You will stay in that bed until I say otherwise," she told him firmly when she caught him trying to stand. "Unless you want those stitches to tear and start this whole process over again." He grumbled, but obeyed, and Clara hid her smile. It was oddly satisfying, taking care of him after all the ways he'd taken care of her. On the third night, while she changed his bandages. Eli caught her hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "I would have died out there." "Then we're even?" Clara replied, "You saved me from a different kind of death." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. The lightest touch, but it sent warmth spreading up her arm. "Clara, But whatever he was going to say was lost as he pulled back, releasing her hand. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them. Subtle as snow settling, but just as undeniable. As Eli recovered, he began teaching Clara more about survival in the mountains. Not just the pleasant skills he'd shown her before, but the harsh realities. How to set a broken bone, how to recognize signs of frostbite, how to find shelter in a whiteout. "Why are you teaching me all this?" she asked one afternoon as he showed her how to build a snow cave. "Because the mountain doesn't care if you're ready or not," he said. "And because—" He paused, seeming to wrestle with the words. "Because if something happens to me, I need to know you can survive." The thought of something happening to him made her chest tight. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Clara." His voice was gentle but firm. "We both know that's not a promise anyone can make, not out here." She thought of Josiah, of how she'd believed they had years ahead of them. "I know," she whispered. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Eli surprised her. "Will you read to me? My eyes are still giving me trouble." It was a lie. She'd seen him reading just that morning, but she understood the real request. He wanted to hear her voice, to share the quiet intimacy of stories told in firelight. She chose Shakespeare's sonnets, her voice soft in the quiet cabin. When she reached, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments," Eli closed his eyes, listening with an intensity that made her voice falter. "Keep going," he said quietly. "Please." So she read on, through love poems and contemplations of mortality, until her throat was dry and the fire burned low. When she finally closed the book, Eli was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "My mother used to read to us," he said. "Winter nights like this, all of us gathered close. I'd forgotten how it felt, being read to, the safety in it. I could read more tomorrow." Clara offered, "If you'd like, I'd like that very much." Over the following weeks, reading became their evening ritual. Sometimes poetry, sometimes novels, sometimes the Bible when Clara felt the need for familiar comfort. Eli would whittle or mend harness while she read, but she knew he was listening by the way he'd smile at humorous passages or frown at tragic ones. One night, emboldened by the domesticity of it all, Clara asked, "Have you ever thought of taking another wife?" Eli's knife stilled on the wood. "No," he said after a long pause. "Never seemed fair to ask someone to share this life. It's not easy, living up here away from everything. Some might not see it as hardship." Clara ventured, "Some might see it as peace." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt exposed as if he could see straight through to her heart. "And do you find peace here?" "Yes," she said simply. "More than I ever thought possible." They held each other's gaze for a long moment before Eli returned to his whittling. But Clara noticed his hands weren't quite steady, and when she resumed reading, her voice trembled on the first few words. The next morning brought fresh snow and a new awkwardness between them. They moved around each other carefully, overly polite, avoiding the accidental touches that had become commonplace. It was as if having acknowledged the possibility of something more. They were both terrified of it. The tension built for days until Clara couldn't bear it anymore. She found Eli in the barn, mending a bridle with unnecessary focus. "Are we going to talk about it?" she asked. He didn't pretend not to understand. "What do you want me to say?" "Something, anything. Tell me I'm not alone in feeling—" She stopped, frustrated. "Tell me you feel it too." Eli set down the bridle, his movements careful and deliberate. When he looked at her, his eyes held pain and longing in equal measure. "I feel it," he said quietly. "God help me. Clara, I feel it every moment of every day. When you sing while you cook, when you laugh at something you're reading, When you stood over me with that fierce look, saying you wouldn't let me die." He shook his head. "But feeling it and acting on it are different things." "Why?" The word came out more plea than question. "Because you're still grieving. Because you've been through hell and I won't be another man who takes advantage. You're nothing like them?" Clara stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of green in his gray eyes. "Nothing. You're the first person to see me as myself since Josiah died. Not as the preacher's widow. Not as property. Just as Clara." "Clara." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "You don't know what you're asking." "Don't I?" She reached out, touching his face. His eyes closed at the contact, a shudder running through him. "I'm asking for the chance to live again. To choose something for myself. To choose you, if you'll let me." When he kissed her, it was with a desperation that spoke of months of holding back, of want transformed into need. Clara melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. This was nothing like the gentle, almost brotherly affection she'd shared with Josiah. This was fire and storm, passion and promise all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eli rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "Because if we do this, if we cross this line, I won't be able to go back. I won't be able to pretend you're just a guest in my house anymore." "I don't want to be a guest," Clara said fiercely. "I want to be home, here, with you, if you'll have me." He kissed her again, softer this time but no less intense. "If I'll have you," he repeated, almost laughing. "Clara Whitmore, you've turned my life upside down from the moment you walked through my door. I've been yours since the night I saw them trying to sell you like cattle and knew I'd do anything to keep you safe." They stood there in the barn, holding each other while snow fell softly outside, beginning to write a new story on the blank page of their joined lives. The candlelight flickered across Clara's face as she stood in the doorway of what had been her room, now their room. The decision had been made without words after their kiss in the barn. She simply hadn't barred the door that night, and Eli had understood the invitation. He came to her slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. His hands were gentle as they traced her face, her throat, the curve of her shoulders. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he whispered against her ear. "Don't stop," she breathed, pulling him closer. "Please don't stop." What followed was a joining of not just bodies but souls scarred by loss. Eli's hands found the places where grief had hollowed her out, filling them with tenderness. Clara traced the scars on his body, the new ones from the mountain cat, older ones from a life lived hard, and blessed each one with her touch. They moved together with the careful passion of those who understood how precious and fragile such moments were. When Clara cried, Eli kissed away her tears without asking if they were from sorrow or joy, perhaps understanding they were both. When old ghosts threatened to intrude, they held each other tighter, anchoring themselves in the present. Afterward, they lay entwined, Clara's head on Eli's chest, listening to his heartbeat. The steady rhythm was more comforting than any words could be. "I didn't think I could feel this again," she admitted into the darkness. "After Josiah, I thought that part of me had died with him." Eli's arm tightened around her. "Maybe it did," he said softly. "Maybe we both died a little with our losses. But we're here now, alive and choosing each other. That matters." Clara pressed a kiss to his chest, over his heart. "Do you think they'd understand? Mary and Josiah?" "I think they'd want us to be happy," Eli said after a moment. "Mary, especially. She was always trying to convince me to come down from the mountain, find a nice woman to settle down with." His voice held fond remembrance rather than pain. "She would have liked you. Josiah would have liked you too," Clara said. "He always saw the good in people, even when they tried to hide it." They talked through the night, sharing stories they'd held back before. Clara learned that Eli had been a cavalry officer before coming west with his family, that he'd seen too much death in the war between the states and sworn never to take another life unless forced. The men who'd hurt Mary had broken that vow, and the breaking had sent him into exile as much as grief had. Eli learned that Clara had lost a baby early in her marriage to Josiah, that the doctor had said she might never carry a child to term. It was another sorrow she'd carried alone, another reason the Whitmores had seen her as worthless. "You're not worthless," Eli said fiercely, turning her to face him. "Never think that." "I'm starting to believe it." Clara admitted, "Here with you, I'm starting to believe I might be worth something after all." Dawn found them still awake, watching the light creep across the mountains through their window. Clara felt transformed, as if the night had washed her clean of old griefs and left space for new beginnings. The days that followed were like learning to dance to new music. They moved around each other differently now, touches lingering, glances holding promises for when darkness fell again. The cabin that had felt like a refuge became a true home, filled with the small intimacies of shared life. Clara threw herself into spring preparations with new energy. She organized the root cellar, planned an expanded garden, mended everything that could be mended. When Eli watched her with that soft look that made her insides melt, she'd abandon whatever task she was doing and go to him, no longer shy about claiming the affection she craved. "We're going to need more supplies come spring," Eli said one evening. "Going over their stores. I'll have to make a trip to town." The mention of town, any town, made Clara tense. "Which town?" "Not Dry Hollow," he assured her quickly. "There's a settlement about 2 days north, Pine Creek. Bigger, more civilized. We could go together if you'd like." The idea of leaving their mountain sanctuary frightened her. But Clara recognized the fear for what it was, not of the world itself, but of losing what they'd built together. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Maybe we could, that is, if you wanted." She stopped, flustered. "What?" Eli prompted gently. "Maybe we could speak to a preacher there," she said in a rush. "Make things official, if you want to. That is, I know we haven't talked about—" Eli silenced her with a kiss. "Clara Whitmore," he said when they broke apart. "Are you proposing to me?" She lifted her chin, finding her courage. "Yes, I am. Will you marry me, Eli Carver?" His smile was radiant. Nothing would make me happier. They made love with a fierce joy that night, celebrating their improvised engagement. Clara thought of all the proper courtship rituals she'd once believed necessary, the calling cards and chaperoned visits, the formal proposal with family approval. None of that mattered now. What mattered was the man in her arms and the life they were choosing together. The next morning, Eli surprised her with a ring, a simple band of silver he'd been carving from an old coin, working on it in secret for weeks. "It's not much," he said apologetically as he slipped it onto her finger. "When we get to a proper town, I'll buy you something better." "Don't you dare," Clara said fiercely, admiring how the carefully carved metal caught the light. "This is perfect. You made it for me. That makes it worth more than any store-bought ring." They began making real plans then, not just for the trip to Pine Creek, but for their life together. Eli showed her the boundaries of his land claim, the places where he'd thought to build a larger house someday, never imagining he'd have someone to share it with. "We could add on to the existing cabin," Clara suggested. "A proper bedroom, maybe a room for—" She stopped, old pain flickering across her face. "For children," Eli finished gently. The doctor could have been wrong, Clara, but even if he wasn't, even if it's just the two of us forever, that's enough. You're enough. She kissed him for that, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. As the snow began to melt and the first green shoots pushed through the earth, Clara found herself humming constantly. Not the desperate, defiant humming of winter, but something joyful and free. She sang while she worked, and Eli often paused in his own tasks just to listen. One afternoon, as she knelt in the newly thawed garden plot, planning where each vegetable would grow, Eli came up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. Clara leaned back into his embrace. feeling the solid warmth of him, the safety of his arms. 6 months ago, she'd been as good as dead, sold for whiskey, bereft of hope, existing but not living. Now she was planting a garden with a man who loved her, wearing his handmade ring, carrying the pleasant ache of their lovemaking. "Yes," she said simply. "Happier than I ever thought possible. Even here, away from everything." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "Especially here. This mountain, this cabin, this is my everything now." They kissed there in the muddy garden, not caring that their knees were getting soaked or that they were both grimy from work. It was the kiss of two people who had found their way through darkness to each other, who understood that happiness was not a destination, but a choice made daily. That night, as they lay together watching the stars through their window, Clara traced lazy patterns on Eli's chest. "Do you ever think about how strange life is? If Josiah hadn't died, if your sister, we never would have met." "I've thought about it," Eli admitted. Felt guilty about it too, finding happiness that came from such sorrow. But maybe that's how life works. Maybe the broken places are where new things can grow. Clara thought about that, about the way a forest fire cleared ground for new growth, how spring always followed winter no matter how harsh. "Like these mountains," she said. "Beautiful because they're hard, not in spite of it." "Like us," Eli agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. They made love again, slow and sweet this time, savoring each touch and sigh. Clara felt wild and free in a way she never had before, unashamed of her desire, unafraid to take what she wanted. Eli met her passion with his own, whispering words of love and praise that made her feel cherished, desired, whole. Later, drifting toward sleep, Clara said, "I want you to teach me to shoot." She felt Eli tense slightly. "Why?" "Because I won't be helpless again. Because if something threatens our life here, I want to help defend it. Because I'm not the same woman who was sold for whiskey. And I never will be again." Eli was quiet for a long moment, then pressed a kiss to her temple. "All right, we'll start tomorrow." Clara smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow they'd begin preparing for their trip to Pine Creek, where they'd marry and make their union official in the eyes of God and law. But in her heart, she was already his wife, bound by something stronger than words or paper. She thought of Josiah one more time, not with guilt, but with gratitude. He had shown her she was capable of being loved. Now Eli was showing her she was capable of loving again, of being partner rather than property, of building a life on her own terms. Outside, an owl called through the night, and its mate answered. Clara pressed closer to Eli, feeling his heartbeat against her back, and knew herself finally, fully, home. The riders came at dawn, their horses' hoofbeats shattering the mountain's peace like stones through glass. Clara woke to Eli's hand over her mouth, his body tense beside her. "Get dressed," he whispered urgently. "Quickly." Through the window, she could see them, 6 men, maybe 7, spreading out to surround the cabin. Even in the dim light, she recognized Jake Morrison's bulky form, Pete Garrett's distinctive limp. They'd come for her. "The rifle's above the door," Eli said, already pulling on his clothes. "You remember what I taught you?" Clara nodded, her hands surprisingly steady as she dressed. The shooting lessons of the past weeks had given her confidence. But more than that, they'd given her the knowledge that she would never be helpless again. "Eli Carver," Morrison's voice boomed across the clearing. "We know you're in there with stolen property. Send out the woman and we'll let you be." "Property!" Clara spat the word like a curse. "Still thinking they own me?" "They're about to learn different," Eli said grimly. He handed her the rifle, taking his pistol for himself. "Whatever happens, you stay inside unless I tell you otherwise. Promise me." "Eli, promise me." "Clara." She saw the fear in his eyes, not for himself but for her, and nodded. "I promise." Eli stepped out onto the porch, his movements casual despite the weapons trained on him. "Gentlemen," he said mildly. "Bit early for a social call." "Cut the act, Carver," Morrison snarled. "You took something that belonged to us. We've come to collect. Last I checked, the 13th Amendment made it clear folks can't belong to other folks. Eli replied, "Course, maybe news travels slow to Dry Hollow. Don't get smart with us." Thomas Whitmore emerged from behind the barn, shotgun in hand. That woman's got debts to pay. Family debts. Christian duty to her late husband's kin. Christian duty? Eli's voice went cold. Like the Christian duty you showed when you tried to sell her for whiskey? She's coming back with us, Garrett said, working his way closer to the cabin. One way or another, you can die trying to stop us, but she's coming back. Clara watched through a crack in the shutters, the rifle heavy in her hands. She thought of the nights these men had terrorized her, the day they'd bartered her like livestock. No more. Never again. "I've got a different proposition," Eli said. "You turn those horses around and ride out. Forget you ever knew Clara Whitmore's name. Live your lives and let us live ours." Morrison laughed ugly. "Or what? You'll take on 7 men by yourself?" 6, Eli corrected. "Simpson, there's about to fall off his horse. He's so drunk. And I wouldn't count too heavy on young Phillips. Boy's barely old enough to shave, let alone die for your cause." It was true. Clara could see the younger man shifting nervously in his saddle, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Enough talk," Thomas said, raising his shotgun. "Send her out, or—" The shot came from behind the cabin, not from Eli or any of the men, but from the tree line. A warning shot that kicked up dirt near Thomas's feet, making his horse rear. "I'd think real careful about your next move," a woman's voice called out. Clara gasped. She knew that voice. Sarah Mills, the elderly woman who'd spoken up for her during the mock trial. But what was she doing here? More figures emerged from the woods. Clara recognized Samuel Chen, the Chinese merchant who Josiah had defended, William and Martha Blackwood, a free black couple who'd been kind to her, even young Daniel Martinez, whose family Josiah had helped when they were being pushed off their land. "Seems you're not the only ones who can form a posse," Sarah said, her ancient rifle steady in her gnarled hands. "Difference is, we came to defend, not attack." "This isn't your business," Morrison blustered. But Clara could see his confidence wavering. "The preacher made it our business," William Blackwood said firmly. "Man died trying to protect all of us. Least we can do is protect his widow." "She ain't his widow no more." Thomas spat. "She's living in sin with this murderer. Actually," Eli interrupted calmly, "she's my wife. We were married 2 weeks ago in Pine Creek, all legal and proper." He pulled a paper from his shirt pocket. "Got the certificate right here if you'd like to see it." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. They'd told no one of their quiet ceremony, wanting to keep their joy private a little longer. But Eli had known this day might come, had made sure to protect her legally as well as physically. "That changes nothing," Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. "She still what?" Sarah Mills stepped forward, her weathered face fierce. "Still owes you something? I was there, Jake Morrison. I saw you lose her in a card game. Saw Eli Carver pay your price and more. Far as the law's concerned, and far as God's concerned, that ended any claim you had. You don't understand." Thomas's voice turned pleading. "She knows things. About the preacher's death. Things that could cause trouble." "You mean she knows you murdered him?" Samuel Chen said bluntly. "We all know. Thomas, the whole town knows. Only reason nothing's been done is we were all too scared or too weak to stand up." Well, not anymore. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara could see Eli calculating odds, measuring distances. His hand was steady on his gun, but she knew he'd rather avoid bloodshed if possible. Then young Phillips did something unexpected. He holstered his gun and turned his horse away. "I didn't sign up to threaten women and start a war with half the territory," he said. "You want to pursue this? You do it without me." His defection broke something in the group's resolve. Simpson, who had indeed been swaying in his saddle, muttered something about this being too much trouble and followed Phillips, one by one. The hired guns began melting away, until only Morrison, Garrett, and Thomas remained. "This isn't over," Morrison warned. but he was already backing his horse away. "Yes, it is," Clara said. Everyone turned as she stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. She kept it lowered but ready, her stance showing she knew how to use it. "It's over because I say it's over," she continued, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "You want to know what I know about Josiah's death? I know you killed a good man for preaching love instead of hate. I know you did it for money and power and fear of change. And I know that someday you'll answer for it, if not to earthly justice, then to a higher court." She took a breath, drawing strength from Eli's presence beside her. "But I also know I'm done being afraid of you. I'm done letting you control my life. I have a husband who loves me, neighbors who support me, and a home on this mountain. You have nothing but your hate and greed. So ride away, and don't come back, because next time, I won't be as merciful." Thomas's face contorted with rage, but Morrison grabbed his arm. "Come on," he muttered. "This ain't worth dying over." They rode away slowly, trying to salvage some dignity from their retreat. Clara watched until they disappeared down the trail, then let the rifle drop. Eli's arms came around her immediately, holding her as the adrenaline shakes started. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her hair. "We were lucky," Clara said, looking at their unexpected defenders. "If you hadn't come, we've been watching the roads." Sarah admitted. "Ever since you two were spotted in Pine Creek, we figured Morrison might try something. The preacher. He helped every one of us at some point. Seemed fitting we return the favor." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I thought the whole town hated him. Hated me." "The loud ones did," William said. "But there were always those who knew better. We were just too scared to speak up before your husband's death. It woke something in us. Made us realize staying quiet makes us complicit." "Will you come in?" Eli asked. "We've got coffee, food." "No need," Sarah said, but she was smiling. "We'll camp down the trail a bit. Keep watch for a few days to make sure they don't come back. You two, you've earned your peace." As their protectors melted back into the woods, Clara and Eli stood on their porch, watching the sun climb over the mountains. The confrontation had lasted less than an hour, but Clara felt as if years had passed. "Do you think they'll really stay away?" she asked. "Morrison's practical above all else," Eli said. "He knows the whole territory would come down on him if something happened to us now. Too many witnesses, too many people willing to talk. We're safe." Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid truth of it. They were safe. More than that, they were home, surrounded by unexpected allies, protected by law and community and their own strength. "You called me your wife," she said softly, in front of everyone. "You are my wife," Eli said simply. "In every way that matters. Have been since the night you chose to stay with me instead of running." The ceremony just made official what my heart already knew. They went inside together, the rifle back in its place above the door but within easy reach. Clara made coffee while Eli started breakfast, moving around each other with the easy rhythm of long partnership. "I meant what I said," Clara told him as they sat down to eat. "About being done with fear. I won't live looking over my shoulder anymore." "You won't have to," Eli promised. "But Clara, what you did out there, facing them down like that, I've never been more proud or more terrified in my life. I learned from the best," she said, catching his hand across the table. "You taught me to shoot, but more than that, you taught me I was worth defending, that I had the right to defend myself." That evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara felt a profound shift inside herself. The woman who'd been sold for whiskey was truly gone, replaced by someone stronger, fiercer, more whole. She'd faced her demons and won, not through violence, but through courage and the unexpected grace of community. "Read to me?" Eli requested, and Clara smiled. It was their ritual now, these quiet evenings of shared stories. But tonight, instead of Shakespeare or poetry, she picked up Josiah's Bible. "Be strong and of a good courage," she read, her voice steady and clear. Fear not, nor be afraid of them. For the Lord thy God, he it is that doth go with thee. He will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Eli's hand found hers, and they sat in peaceful silence as darkness fell over their mountain. They'd been tested and had emerged stronger. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as victim and protector, but as equals, partners. Two souls who had found their way through darkness into light. The letter arrived on a crisp April morning, carried by a rider who'd made the journey specifically to find Eli's cabin. Clara watched from the garden as Eli read it, his face cycling through surprise, concern, and finally, something like relief. "What is it?" she asked, brushing dirt from her hands. "It's from a federal marshal in Denver," Eli said, handing her the letter. "Seems our visit from Morrison's gang didn't go unnoticed. Someone, he doesn't say who, reported the incident. They're opening an investigation into Josiah's death." Clara's hands trembled as she read. After all this time, the possibility of justice seemed surreal. Will they really investigate? It's been over a year. The marshal seems to think there's enough evidence to proceed. Several witnesses have come forward. Eli paused, studying her face. "He wants us to come to Denver to give testimony." The thought of leaving their mountain sanctuary again, of reliving those terrible days, made Clara's stomach clench. But underneath the fear was something else, a fierce desire to see justice done, to speak Josiah's truth in a court of law. "When?" she asked. "Next month." "Clara, you don't have to do this. We could stay here, let others carry this burden." "No." Her voice came out stronger than she'd expected. "I need to do this, for Josiah, for myself, for everyone Morrison and his kind have hurt. I need to speak the truth." Eli pulled her into his arms. "Then we'll go together. And when it's done, we'll come home." The weeks passed quickly. Clara threw herself into preparations, preserving food for their absence, arranging for Samuel Chen's son to tend the animals. But at night, old fears crept back. She dreamed of the hanging tree, of Thomas's cruel laughter, of being dragged back to Dry Hollow in chains. Each time she woke gasping, Eli was there, holding her until the trembling stopped. "You're not that woman anymore," he'd remind her. "You're Clara Carver now, and you bow to no one." The night before they left, Eli surprised her with a gift, a new dress he'd had made in Pine Creek, respectable but not somber, in a deep blue that brought out her eyes. "You'll be speaking for Josiah," he said as she tried it on. "But you'll be doing it as yourself, as the woman you've become. Seemed fitting you should look the part." Clara kissed him deeply, marveling again at this man who understood her so completely. The journey to Denver took 5 days. As they descended from the mountains, the landscape opened up, towns becoming larger and more frequent. Clara found herself gripping Eli's hand tighter with each mile that took them closer to civilization. Denver itself was overwhelming, a proper city with paved streets, tall buildings, and more people than Clara had seen in years. They took rooms at a respectable hotel, and Clara tried not to stare at the luxury of indoor plumbing and gas lights. The federal building was imposing, all stone and authority. Marshal James McKenna was younger than Clara had expected, with sharp eyes and a manner that suggested he missed nothing. "Mrs. Carver," he greeted her, and Clara felt a small thrill at the name. "Thank you for making this journey. I know it can't have been easy. The truth needs telling," Clara said simply. What followed were 3 days of testimony, first in private depositions, then in a formal hearing. Clara told everything: Josiah's work with the marginalized, the threats he'd received, the sham trial, the hanging. She spoke of her own treatment afterward, the attempt to sell her, Eli's intervention. "It must have been terrifying," the prosecutor said gently. "Being treated as property." Clara straightened in her chair. "It was. But it also showed me what these men really were. Cowards who could only feel powerful by crushing others. My husband saw them clearly, and they killed him for it. But his truth didn't die with him." When it came time for Eli to testify, Clara watched with pride as he calmly, methodically laid out what he'd observed in Dry Hollow. His military bearing and quiet authority made him a compelling witness. Other testimonies followed. Sarah Mills, who'd made the journey despite her age. Samuel Chen, speaking through an interpreter about Josiah's advocacy. The Blackwoods, describing the systematic intimidation that kept the town in line. On the third day, they brought in Thomas Whitmore and Jake Morrison in chains. Clara hadn't expected to see them, and for a moment, the old fear paralyzed her. Then she felt Eli's hand brush hers, a subtle reminder of her strength, and the fear transformed into cold anger. Thomas tried to bluster, to claim Clara was lying for revenge. Morrison attempted to paint himself as a legitimate businessman protecting the town's interests. But their stories crumbled under questioning, especially when presented with written evidence, letters and ledgers Sarah Mills had somehow procured that detailed their schemes. "You killed my husband," Clara said when given the chance to address them directly. "You killed a good man whose only crime was believing in justice for all people. You tried to destroy me too, to reduce me to nothing. But you failed. Josiah's love lives on in every person he helped, and I—" She stood taller. "I am still here, speaking his truth." Morrison couldn't meet her eyes. Thomas spat curses until the marshal had him removed. The verdict, when it came, was everything Clara had hoped for. Morrison and Thomas would hang for murder and conspiracy. The others would face prison terms. Property that had been illegally seized would be returned to its rightful owners. "It won't bring him back," Clara said quietly as they left the courthouse. "No," Eli agreed. "But his death means something now. It's brought change, exposed corruption. He'd be proud of you." Clara. That evening, in their hotel room, Clara stood at the window watching the city lights. Tomorrow they'd begin the journey home, back to their mountain and their quiet life. But tonight, she felt the weight of the past year lifting from her shoulders. "I want to do something before we leave," she told Eli. "Will you come with me?" He followed without question as she led him to a small church she'd noticed near the courthouse. It was empty at this hour, candles flickering in the dim interior. Clara knelt in a pew, Eli beside her, and for the first time since Josiah's death, she prayed aloud. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me the strength to survive, for sending Eli when I needed saving, for allowing justice to prevail. And Josiah," her voice caught, "Josiah, I hope you know that I loved you, that I'll always carry part of you with me. But I'm living again, truly living. And I think that's what you'd want." When she opened her eyes, tears on her cheeks but peace in her heart, Eli was watching her with such tenderness it took her breath away. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly. "Yes," Clara said, taking his offered hand. "I'm ready." The journey back to the mountain felt different. Clara wasn't fleeing anymore, wasn't hiding. She was returning to a life she'd chosen, with a man she loved, having spoken truth to power and won. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the air growing thin and cold, Clara felt herself expanding. The woman who'd been sold for whiskey was truly gone, but she'd left gifts behind, strength forged in suffering, compassion deepened by cruelty, and a fierce appreciation for freedom. "Look," Eli said, pointing ahead. Their cabin came into view, smoke rising from the chimney where Samuel's son had kept the fire going. The garden showed new growth, the horses grazed peacefully in their pasture, and the mountains stood eternal around them. "Welcome home, Mrs. Carver," Eli said, helping her from her horse. Clara stood for a moment, breathing in the pine-scented air, feeling the solid earth beneath her feet. Then she laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed off the peaks. "Home," she repeated, and kissed her husband under the vast Wyoming sky. That night, as they lay entwined in their bed, Clara told Eli something she'd been holding close to her heart. "I've missed my monthly courses," she said quietly. "Twice now. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, but I think we're going to have a baby." Eli's hand found her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. "Clara, are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I know what the doctor said, but—" He silenced her with a kiss full of wonder and joy. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby." They talked through the night, making plans, choosing names, marveling at this unexpected gift. Clara thought of all the barren years with Josiah, the shame she'd carried, the Whitmores' cruel words about her worthlessness. "Maybe I needed to heal first," she said. "Maybe I needed to find myself again before I could create new life. Maybe you needed to find the right partner," Eli suggested, and she laughed at his proud grin. As dawn broke over the mountains, Clara placed Eli's hand over her stomach again. "I want to name him Josiah, if it's a boy. Would that be all right? It would be an honor," Eli said seriously. "A way to carry forward the best of the past into the future." Clara smiled, picturing a small boy with Eli's gray eyes and steady nature, carrying the name of a man who died for justice, or perhaps a girl with her own stubborn strength, ready to take on the world. Either way, this child would be born free, raised in love, taught that every person had worth and dignity. It would be Josiah's final legacy and her greatest triumph, life springing from death, hope from despair, joy from sorrow. "I love you," she told Eli, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "And I love you," he replied, gathering her close. "My Clara, my wife, mother of my child, my redemption." Outside their window, the sun painted the peaks gold and crimson, a new day dawning over their mountain kingdom. Clara closed her eyes, Eli's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, their child growing within her, and knew herself complete at last. The preacher's widow was gone. In her place stood Clara Carver, wife, soon-to-be mother, survivor, and thriver. A woman who'd been sold for whiskey but had purchased her freedom with courage. A woman who'd lost everything and gained the world. A woman who was finally, fully, home. The first pains came with the November snow, 3 weeks earlier than Clara had calculated. She'd been preparing bread when the cramping started, low and insistent. By the time she called for Eli, working in the barn, she knew their child was coming. "It's too soon," she gasped, gripping the table edge as another wave hit. "The midwife from Pine Creek won't make it in this weather." Eli's face was calm, but she could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that lived in her own heart. They were alone on the mountain with a storm building and their baby demanding to be born. "Then we do this ourselves," he said firmly, helping her to their bed. "Women have been birthing babies since the beginning of time. We're strong enough for this." "Clara." The hours that followed tested every ounce of that strength. The storm howled outside, matching Clara's cries as the contractions intensified. Eli never left her side, letting her crush his hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement when she swore she couldn't go on. "Remember what you told me," he said during a brief respite between pains. "You said you wouldn't let me die that night with the fever. Well, I won't let you give up now. You're the strongest woman I know. Clara Carver, you can do this." Clara found reserve she didn't know existed, drawing on the same fierce will that had kept her alive through grief and degradation. This pain had purpose. It was bringing their child into the world. When the final moments came, Eli was there to catch their son, small but perfect, with a lusty cry that filled the cabin and Clara's heart simultaneously. Eli placed the baby on her chest with shaking hands, and Clara saw tears streaming down his weathered face. "He's beautiful," Eli whispered. "Lord above, Clara, he's perfect." The baby was indeed small, but his grip was strong when he wrapped tiny fingers around Clara's thumb. His eyes, when they opened, were gray like his father's, and the wisp of hair on his head promised to be dark like hers. "Josiah," Clara said softly, testing the name. "Josiah Eli Carver. A strong name for a strong boy." Eli agreed, wrapping them both in warm blankets. The storm passed with the dawn, leaving the world crystalline and new. As Clara dozed with baby Josiah at her breast, Eli kept watch, still marveling at the miracle they'd created together. When she woke, she found him writing in a journal he kept, recording the date and time of birth, the weather, every detail he could capture. Want him to know how he came into the world, Eli explained, almost shy, how his mama was brave as any warrior, bringing him forth in a blizzard with just his fool father for help. Clara reached for his hand. Not foolish. Never that. You saved us both. The early days were challenging. Young Josiah was eager to eat, but Clara's milk was slow to come in properly. There were nights when all three of them cried from exhaustion and frustration. But gradually, they found their rhythm. Clara discovered that singing the old hymns soothed the baby, while Eli could rock him to sleep with a patience that seemed infinite. Sarah Mills made the treacherous journey up the mountain when Josiah was a month old, bringing supplies and her decades of wisdom about babies. He's thriving, she pronounced after a thorough examination. Small but fierce, like his mama. You've done well, both of you. She stayed a week, teaching Clara tricks for increasing her milk supply, showing Eli how to swaddle properly, and generally grandmothering them all into better health. Never thought I'd see the day, she told Clara privately. You rising from those ashes, building a life like this, that husband of yours looks at you like you hung the moon. He gave me reason to shine again, Clara said simply. As winter deepened, their world contracted to the warm circle of the cabin. Eli had laid in extra supplies, anticipating being snowed in with a new baby. Those months were some of the happiest of Clara's life. Long, quiet days of nursing Josiah, watching him grow and change, seeing Eli blossom into fatherhood. He was endlessly gentle with his son, talking to him seriously about everything from horse care to philosophy, while changing diapers or walking him through colicky nights. Teaching him early, Eli explained when Clara laughed at a particularly earnest discussion of water rights conducted over the baby's bassinet. Man needs to understand the world he's born into. Spring came late but glorious, and with it, visitors. The Blackwoods brought handmade blankets and toys. Samuel Chen's family came with preserves and baby clothes their children had outgrown. Even some folks from Dry Hollow made the journey, those who'd stood silent during the bad times but wanted to make amends now. Clara received them all graciously, though she noticed how Eli kept his rifle close during those visits. Some wounds, she understood, would never fully heal. On Josiah's first birthday, they held a celebration that filled the cabin and spilled into the yard. Clara watched their son toddle between guests, already showing the determined nature that would serve him well in this hard country. He's going to be remarkable, Eli said, coming up behind her as she stood in the doorway. He already is, Clara replied, leaning back into her husband's embrace. Our miracle baby. That evening, after the guests had gone and Josiah slept in his crib, Clara and Eli sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains. It had been almost 3 years since that terrible night in Dry Hollow. 3 years since Eli had paid double and ridden away with her into a new life. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Clara asked. Sometimes, Eli admitted. But then I look at you, at our son, at this life we've built, and I can't imagine wanting any other path. Clara turned to study his face, still handsome despite the lines that sun and wind had carved. Even with all the pain it took to get here? The pain shaped us, Eli said thoughtfully, made us who we needed to be for each other. I'm not grateful for the suffering, but I'm grateful for where it led. From inside came a cry, Josiah waking from his nap, ready for attention. Clara started to rise, but Eli was already moving. I'll get him, he said, kissing her forehead. You rest. Clara listened to Eli's deep voice through the window, talking to their son about the evening chores that needed doing, and smiled. This was her life now, not the genteel existence she'd imagined as a young bride in Missouri, not the ministries she'd planned with her first Josiah, but something uniquely hers. She thought of the woman who'd stood in that saloon, being bartered for whiskey, believing her life was over. If she could tell that woman anything, it would be this. Hold on, your story isn't finished. The very things that seem like endings are sometimes doorways to beginnings you can't imagine. A few months later, Clara stood in the same spot where she'd once knelt in the garden, planting vegetables. Now she watched young Josiah chase a butterfly, his laughter bright as bells on the mountain air. Her stomach was rounding again with their second child. Another miracle the doctor had said would never come. "Mama," Josiah called, holding up a flower he'd picked. "For you." Clara knelt to accept the somewhat crushed bloom, kissing his chubby cheek. "Thank you, my love. It's beautiful." Eli emerged from the barn, tools in hand, and Josiah immediately ran to him. "Papa, up!" watching her husband swing their son onto his shoulders. Clara felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what redemption looked like. Not a dramatic moment, but 1,000 small ones. Every laugh from their child, every peaceful morning, every night she fell asleep in Eli's arms was a victory over those who tried to diminish her. "What are you thinking?" Eli asked, approaching with Josiah still perched above. "That I'm happy," Clara said simply, truly, deeply happy. "Good," Eli said, his free arm coming around her waist. "That's all I ever wanted for you." They stood together in the afternoon sun, a family forged from loss but defined by love. The preacher's widow was just a memory now, a ghost from another life. Clara Carver was real and present and whole, with dirt under her nails from gardening, milk stains on her dress from nursing, and joy radiating from every pore. Down in Dry Hollow, folks still told the story of the night Eli Carver paid double for the minister's widow. Some told it as a cautionary tale about pride and redemption. Others saw it as a love story, proof that even in the harshest places, tenderness could bloom. But up on the mountain, Clara and Eli were too busy living to worry about how their story was told. They had crops to tend and children to raise, animals to care for, and a life to build day by day. They had found in each other not just love, but partnership. Not just passion, but purpose. The circle was complete, from death to life, from despair to hope, from being sold for whiskey to being valued beyond measure. Clara touched her belly where new life grew and smiled. Their story would continue through their children and their children's children, each generation carrying forward the lesson that human dignity could never truly be bought or sold. In the end, love was the only currency that mattered. And in that, Clara Carver was the richest woman in all of Wyoming territory. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Carver family headed inside for supper. Through the windows, lamplight spilled warm and welcoming, a beacon of hope in the wilderness, proof that even in the darkest valleys, grace could find a way. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope Clara and Eli's story touched your hearts as it did mine. I'd love to hear where you're listening from, whether it's on a long drive through the plains, by a cozy fire, or maybe even in the mountains like our characters. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of courage, redemption, and love from the American frontier. And share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and connections make our campfire circle complete.